Can you imagine getting arrested for just doing your job? Well, that's exactly what former CNN anchor Don Lemon is claiming after federal agents arrested him in a pretty dramatic late-night raid. But here's the thing. Prosecutors say he wasn't just doing his job. They say he was breaking the law. In this case, it forces all of us to ask a really critical question about the role of the press today. This is the real tightrope that journalists have to walk every single day. On one side, you have this fundamental duty to report the news, but on the other, you've got the risk of actually becoming part of the story yourself. Prosecutors are convinced Don Lemon fell right off that rope. Meanwhile, press freedom advocates are worried the rope itself is about to be cut. All right, so to really get what's at stake here, we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the arrest itself. Then, the very serious federal charges he's facing. We'll dive into that core debate. Was he a journalist or a participant? After that, we'll uncover the hidden legal battles that led to this moment. And finally, we'll look at how this has the whole nation divided. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. The story of an arrest in California, well, it actually starts thousands of miles away at a protest in Minnesota. Let's just quickly walk through the timeline to get our bearings. It all kicks off back on January 18th when this protest went down, disrupting a church service in St. Paul. Then, just about a week ago, Lemon gets on YouTube and basically says, "They're coming for me next." And sure enough, last Thursday night, federal agents show up and arrest him in Beverly Hills. As of now, he's in custody in LA waiting for a bond hearing. So you're probably wondering, what on earth could lead to a late-night federal arrest of a well-known journalist? Well, the charges, they're pretty serious. Okay, so prosecutors are basically hitting him with a three-pronged attack. First, they're alleging conspiracy to violate civil rights. Second, that he interfered with the churchgoers' own First Amendment rights to worship. And third, and this one's a big deal, a violation of a law called the FACE Act. And this third charge, this is where the prosecution's strategy gets really creative. The FACE Act, that's the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, it's almost always used to protect access to abortion clinics. Using it to protect a church service? That's a bold, and let's be honest, a very unusual legal move by the Department of Justice. And all of this, it brings us right back to that core conflict. The one question that this entire case really hangs on. What exactly was Don Lemon doing at that church? Look, the whole case really boils down to this. The defense is saying, hey, Lemon was just a journalist with a camera doing his job, covering a story. But the prosecution's narrative is completely different. They're saying he crossed a line and became an active participant, helping to disrupt that service. So on one side, you've got Lemon's attorney, Abbe Lowell, and he's framing this as a direct assault on the free press. He says, and I'm quoting here, "This is an unprecedented attack on the First Amendment." That's the whole foundation of their defense. But then you flip it around and the other side sees this completely differently. Critics are arguing that he wasn't just an observer at all, but that he was actually part of the intentional intimidation and the invasion of that church. In their view, his mere presence was an act of participation. But here's a twist you might not know. That dramatic midnight arrest, it almost didn't happen. It was actually the final move after a long and surprisingly tough legal fight that prosecutors were very close to losing. This really shows you just how hard the DOJ had to fight for this. They first went to a judge in Minnesota for the arrest warrant and were rejected. The judge said there just wasn't enough probable cause, basically not enough evidence. So they tried again and were rejected again. They even took it to an appeals court, who basically said, nope. It was only after they went to a totally different court in a different jurisdiction that they finally got the warrant they needed. So, as you can imagine, with a story this explosive, the public reaction was instant and it was intense. It seems to have split public opinion right down the middle. On one side, you have press freedom groups who are sounding the alarm, warning that this could set a really dangerous precedent for every journalist out there. But on the other side, you've got Attorney General Pam Bondi, who says this was a necessary response to what she called a coordinated attack. And it's really falling along predictable lines. You've got praise from the right for defending a church, and then outrage from the left, who see it as a crackdown on dissent. So where do things stand right at this moment? Well, Don Lemon is still in federal custody, waiting for that bond hearing. This is very much a live, developing story, and the legal battle, well, it's really just getting started. Which leaves us all with this final, massive question. This whole case forces us to confront this tension between the freedom of the press and maintaining public order. And it's not just about Don Lemon anymore. It's about where we as a society decide to draw that line for every single journalist in the country. And just so you know, all the information we've talked about today comes from the detailed reporting over at the Shasta Beacon.